first clinics, and from now onwards until the exams are over, it will be clinics. So it will be hectic activity for us. And I also sincerely welcome all the other faculty members who have joined. For today's class, we have none other than Professor Sethubabu from Hyderabad. Professor Sethubabu graduated, he took his DM from All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and he was a professor of Andhra Medical College, Visakhapatnam. And after that, he has now joined the Krishna Institute of Medical Sciences, Hyderabad. He is a very senior consultant. He is member of almost all academic societies in India, and he has got special training from King's College, London. And we all appreciate Professor Sethubabu, and he's seen in almost all meetings in India, whether it is liver, whether it is gastroenterology, and in all teaching sessions in all over India also. So for our students, I think today they are very fortunate to have Professor Sethubabu to discuss the case. And Professor Sethubabu is actually providing us the case, and his student is discussing the case. And the second session is OSCE cases, and Professor Sethubabu provided the OSCE for today as well. And to discuss the case along with Professor Sethubabu, we have Dr. Ismail, Professor Ismail Said, who is a senior consultant now in Aston Medicity, Kochi. He was earlier with the Amartha Institute of Medical Sciences. He is also a very experienced teacher as well as avid researcher and a very good clinician. And I welcome both of you to this evening's program. And there are certain ground rules, all except the chairpersons, the faculty, and the students who are discussing. All the others, please switch off your audio and video. This is to avoid audio interruption as well as to reduce bandwidth constriction. Okay, so that is the ground rule. In case if you have any doubts or comments to make, you can always put it in the chat box. And we will have a discussion.
Jayanti madam, namaste. Namaskar.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am.
I'll be listening.
Okay, so case discussion, Professor Sethubabu, Dr. Ismail, Jayanti ma'am, and other seniors, if they want to make a comment, either audio comments or through chat, they can make in between. But students are expected to make any comments or any queries through chat box only, except the person who is discussing the case. And Dr. Kurula, please be ready. You may also, Dr. Kurula and Praveen are the residents from Kerala side discussing, and some of the questions if Professor Sethubabu want to ask, you can ask them directly, and they will be answering that. Now with this session, I formally hand over the mic to Professor Sethubabu and Dr. Ismail.
Dr. Ismail will do the formalities. I'm a super host, so Ismail will do the.
No, sir, you can take over. No problem.
So, I'll ask our people. Akshay, can you start the case? Akshay?
Can you please start sharing this screen?
Yeah, I'll.
Yes, sir, start.
Akshay, yeah, you show the first slide. Yeah. Akshay, you have open mic. Mic should be open, Akshay.
If there is a ceiling fan there, please switch it off because there is audio disturbance.
I think Dr. Ismail needs to mute.
Is it audible, sir?
Now
It's
yeah.
fine. Now it's fine. Yeah.
Now you start presenting, Akshay, and
Yes,
take best wishes from everybody. He's a first-year student who joined about 3 months back, and I told him this is one of the great opportunities to be present, and then so early, so you should do a good job and impress everybody and take their blessings. Akshay, the floor is yours. Go slow. There is no hurry.
Okay,
and put it in the slideshow mode, please. Slideshow.
Akshay, go to the slideshow mode. Yeah, this is now in.
Is it okay, sir?
Yeah, you
slideshow,
go to the slideshow, go down. There is a beer cup like thing. Open that. Yes. Open that.
So, good evening to all teachers. This is inspiration for this topic is Dr. Sethubabu is my guide, and I'm glad to have a guide like him. So, today's topic is esophageal ulcer, which is always a challenge for endoscopy. So, we just recently had 2 months before a case of 35-year-old male who is complaining of dysphagia since 1 year. On evaluation, patient was a known case of RVD on under treatment. Clinical examination was unremarkable. Upper GI endoscopy revealed large esophageal ulcer in the mid and the lower esophagus, filling the lumen. The ulcer is deep and has a necrotic base. The biopsy were taken from the margins of the ulcer, but the patient was started with the empirical AKT therapy and has received 6 months of AKT. The patient symptom did not improve after 6 months of AKT, and patient was being referred to us in view of continuous symptoms. Repeat upper GI endoscopy done in our institutes, we show the same finding of around 1 to 4 centimeter esophageal ulcer at the lower end of esophagus. This is his reports of, as he is a known case of retroviral disease. His absolute CD4 lymphocytes counts were 25, and HIV viral load were 2400. And we do the endoscopy, which showed as an ulcer at the middle and lower end of the esophagus. So you can, I'll just play the video so that all of you can see.
Allow it to play. Allow it to play. Yeah, you could see the large ulcer there, and that is the end of the ulcer. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. See the ulcer base. See the ulcer base.
Yes.
Now you will get the edge. See the long. Yes, this is the edge of the ulcer. This is the yes.
This
yes,
is large ulcer, almost up to reaching in the middle esophagus.
Yeah, you can stop and go. Yeah, I think it's okay. Maybe by the biopsy, right?
It just took the multiple biopsies from the ulcer bases.
Yeah, you can go to the text part of it now.
Okay, sir. And we sent the biopsy. The report for histopathological examination was intensive. The microscopic appearance was ulcerated squamous mucosa with fluoritic granulation tissue was there, with mixed neutrophil, eosinophil, and lymphocyte infiltrate. There were no definitive viral inclusions which were seen, and there is neither a granuloma evident. The pathologist advised us an immunohistochemistry to exclude a CMA infection if there is a strong possibility. But we could not reach the conclusion at the end of biopsy also. So we have some, we think of some differential diagnosis after such interesting case. In the differential diagnosis for dysphagia and odynophagia in HIV patients, the most frequent of this is Candida albicans, CMV infections, HSV, tubercular ulcer, idiopathic ulcerations, neoplasms like Kaposis sarcoma, lymphoma, squamous cell carcinoma, adenocarcinoma, and the pill-induced esophagitis, GERD, and patient with GERD and its complications. The most commonly infections which is responsible for causing ulcers in RVD patient is Candida albicans, and this infection often coexists with other disorders, and it may occur during primary HIV infection when there is a transient immunosuppression. Presence of oral thrush often predicts you to the concurrent esophagitis in patient with RVD patients. However, the absence of oral thrush does not exclude the possibility of esophageal candidiasis. Patient with esophageal candidiasis generally complains of substernal dysphagia. The dysphagia is the main complaint. Odynophagia, even if it is present, is usually not severe. The definitive diagnosis is usually established by established by an upper GI endoscopy, which reveals either focal or diffuse plaques in association with mucosal hyperemia and friability. The yellow or whitish curly appearance is highly diagnostic for the esophageal candidiasis. A well circumcised ulcer indicates a severe disease. And when you biopsy such patients, you may see a discommitted epithelial cell with typical appearing yeast forms, and you may see a fungal invasion is usually present in the superficial epithelium. So the candidiasis patient. Hello.
Continue.
Akshay, please unmute yourself.
Akshay, open it.
Akshay, can you please unmute?
Right. Okay, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
Yes.
Go on.
Okay, sir. So this is endoscopic imaging pictures of an esophageal candidiasis patient. Given the prevalence of candidal infections, an empirical treatment is usually given. Usually start with a fluconazole, 200 mg loading dose, followed by 100 mg per day. Other drugs which can be used are itraconazole and voriconazole. The second common infection we see in HIV patients causing esophageal ulcer is a CME. It is characterized by the mucosal ulceration, often in immunosuppressed patients. Dysphagia is a much less common complaint. In contrast to the esophageal candidiasis, where odynophagia is a common complaint. Generally, upper endoscopy reveals extensive ulceration that are large and geographic pattern it shows. The endoscopic pattern is variable according to the severity, and CME infections may coexist with the candidal infection. The mucosal biopsies usually shows, when you do mucosal biopsies, shows viral cytopathic effect in mesenchymal and cells with associated granulation tissue. The characteristic inclusion may be absent, necessitating confirmation by immunohistochemical stains. So you may not end to the conclusion even by biopsy. You may need immunohistochemical stains for diagnosis CME infections. This is an endoscopic picture of a CME infection. You can see the four pictures: a longitudinal ulcer and ulcer with uneven base, ill-defined ulcer with ill-defined circumferential ulcer with friability, large geographic ulcer, which is healing one, and the fourth is a deep, well-demarcated ulcer with a shouldering margin. The treatment of CME esophagitis is ganciclovir will give at a dose of 5 mg per kg IV for 12 hours, and once the patient start tolerating orally, we can shift the patient to the well ganciclovir 900 mg per day for 21 to 40 days, 42 days we have to give. The second one, next more common infection in for esophageal infection in HIV patient is a tuberculosis of the esophagus. Esophageal disease is an important presentation of extrapulmonary tuberculosis result from the proximity of the pulmonary lymph node, and it is commonly affect the middle esophagus. And it develops as a secondary infection due to myocardial lymphatic spread from primary infections. The symptom most frequently reported are dysphagia and non-cardiac chest pain. Endoscopic evaluation generally shows mucosal ulceration or an extrinsic bulge in the middle third of the esophagus. The fine needle aspiration and microbiology testings had not been performed. Retrospective studies clearly illustrate the value of endoscopic ultrasound in diagnosing this condition. The endoscopic ultrasound typically shows the large lymph node adjacent to the esophageal ulcer, and when you show it also shows the convoluted mass of heterogeneous lymph node with hypoechoic and intervening hyperechoic stand in the characteristic endoscopic appearance. The subcarinal region is the most common location to have a tubercular ulcer. Esophageal tuberculosis can be easily misled as a metastatic malignant disease that is usually from lung carcinoma metastasis. And always value of clinical diagnosis is more important than fine needle aspiration and acid fast chaining or mycobacterial culture. Histopathological examination of endoscopic biopsy specimen from ulcer with and endoscopic ultrasound fine needle aspiration biopsy lymph node provides the diagnosis in about 80% of cases. In last case series, all patients who completed treatment with anti-tubercular medication, clinical response, there is a clinical response along with endoscopic and endosonographic healing. This is image of a tubercular ulcer. Left sided we can see the endoscopic imaging, whereas in the right side you can see the endoscopic ultrasound imaging. With esophageal ulcer, patient have a enlarged lymph node in the periesophageal regions, which is a highly suggestive of a tubercular esophageal lesion. This is a other imaging. CT scan showing a lymph node near esophagus and the other esophageal ulcers suggestive of tuberculosis. The other infection is a HSV infection. It is a in immunocompetent patients, herpetic esophagitis is usually due to HSV type 1. But however, a point to remember is that in retroviral disease patient or immunocompromised patient, esophagitis can be either due to HSV1 or it can be due to HSV2 also. The disease is similar to herpetic infections of other mucous membrane, as it forms initially the vesicles, it then bursts out to form a shallow ulcer, and finally they are coalesced to form a large diffuse shallow ulceration. The point to differentiate HSV esophagitis from CME esophagitis is that HSV esophagitis ulcer are usually superficial, whereas the CME esophagitis ulcer are usually large, deep ulcers. And the biopsy, when you took in such patients, usually you can find the histological finding of a multinucleate giant cell with ground glass nuclei, that is with eosinophilic inclusion bodies, that is Cowdery type 1 inclusion bodies, and that occupy almost half of the nuclear volume. The treatment for this patient is acyclovir. We will give 400 milligram per orally every 4 hourly for 7 days. This imaging pattern will show the HSV infection of the esophagus. You can see the diffusely distributed white or yellowish lesion initially in the form of vesicles. They will burst to form a shallow ulcer, and as the disease progresses, they will find the coalesce together to form a large ulcer. The point to note is that they are all superficial ulcers. They never go to deep, and in contrast to CME esophagitis, they are superficial, whereas CME esophagitis ulcer are large and deep ulcers. Other ulcers which can be seen in RVD patients or immunocompromised patient, the drug-induced ulcer, the doxycycline is one of the common drug which is responsible for causing such ulcer. It commonly occurs if we swallowed the pill without intake of water, and its common location is at the middle part of esophagus. Patient usually present with dysphagia and retrosternal chest pain after 2 to 3 days. Endoscopy usually reveals the focal and often annular ulcer in the middle part of esophagus. The treatment for this ulcer is antacids and sucralfate, and you can diagnose these patients based on your history. This is an imaging picture of a pill-induced esophageal ulcer. Usually, it affects the middle part of esophagus. It mimics the Crohn's disease. Besides doxycyclines, other drugs like NSAIDs, biphosphonates, and some other drugs can also cause. And with chronic consumption of acid-rich foods such as caffeinated drugs, alcohols, and cigarette smoking can precipitate this type of ulcer by destroying the esophageal mucosa. Corrosive or caustic agents and ingested foreign bodies can also directly damage the esophageal mucosa in contact. The last but not the least, the clinical presentation and endoscopic is idiopathic ulcers. The clinical presentation and endoscopic appearance for this idiopathic ulcer is indistinguishable from esophageal CME infection. To diagnose an idiopathic ulcer, you should have endoscopically, you should confirm an ulcer, and that too by histopathologically. All other common causes should exclude, that CME, HSV, by both histology and immunohistochemical studies. and there should not be clinical or endoscopic evidence of GERD or pill-induced esophagitis. And mostly this patient with idiopathic ulcer will have a CD4 count less than 50. This is a endoscopic imaging picture of a idiopathic ulcer associated with HIV patient. We can see the multiple well circumscribed ulceration throughout the esophagus, which are evident on endoscopic view. Treatment for idiopathic ulcer is in more than 90% of patients is steroids. More than 90% of patients respond to steroid. Usually we give 40 milligram prednisolone. It is to be tapered over a period of 4 weeks. The basis for this glucocorticoid efficacy is unknown. When patient is not responding to glucocorticoids, the thalidomide is highly effective and may be curative when prednisolone fails. Other GERD patients can also have esophageal ulcer. Majority of patients with GERD esophageal ulcer have associated hiatus hernia on endoscopic evaluation. The lower esophageal sphincter usually lacks, and that's why the inhibiting there will be acid reflux, resulting in the exposure of the esophageal mucosa to the gastric acid content. Also, the repeated induced vomiting seen in patient with bulimia nervosa periodically cause exposure of the esophageal mucosa to the gastric contents, and it may lead to esophageal ulceration. Treatment for esophageal ulcer caused by GERD is to control is to acid suppression and promote peristalsis that will promote the internal mucosal healing. In other miscellaneous causes for the esophageal ulcer are some malignancies like Hodgkin's and various non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Kaposi's sarcoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and adenocarcinoma. In the end, to summarize, this is the chart which will summarize common causes of esophageal ulcer in ROD patients and their location. The HIV associated idiopathic ulcer usually affect the middle esophagus. It may be giant, it may be single or multiple, and the shape is oval, or it can be have a bigger depth, or the profound depth also. CME infections usually occur at the inferior part of esophagus and esophagogastric junction. They are usually multiple. They may be small or they may be giant, but the point to note is they are oval in shape, superficial in depth, oval in shape, and have a deeper in depth. Herpetic infections are superficial, affect the superior esophagus. They are multiple, they are small, oval, or round in shape, and superficial in depth. The Candida is infections. They can be easily identified by their white and curdy looking. They are small inside, usually linear, and they are superficial. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Stop sharing the slides. You stop sharing the slide, minimize it, and then, yeah. So we will request Professor Jayanti Madam to make comments. And Ismail will make afterwards. Deepak, you can also make comments.
I just wanted to find out, when you see the patient, what are your differentials? When you see one is dysphagia, and the differentials that will take place in patients who are on antiviral. But when you see such a large ulcer, what will be your endoscopic diagnosis? What are your differentials? What will you write in your endoscopic record? As to what is probably the final years can take up. Dr. Varghese, your students can, because he's first.
Yeah. We have Purivula, Dr. Purivula and Dr. Praveen. Please answer.
Yeah, Praveen, you can just answer what will be your differentials when you saw the endoscopy. Dr. Purivula.
Ma'am, Dr. Praveen, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead, please.
First differential diagnosis in the background of retroviral disease, CME infection, CME ulcer is first. Second is malignancy ulcer can present like a large circumferential ulcer, malignancy. Then
in this patient, this will come like an OSCE,
Yeah,
they'll ask you what are your differentials at what. This is a typical OSCE. What are your differentials at endoscopy? What will be the histology, and what will be your management?
For example, would you consider Canada as your first possibility? Because you started with Canada, even though it's one of the differentials for odynophagia and dysphagia. Will you consider Canada in this patient?
We should consider, but most of the time,
Because it's a huge ulcer. That's the question. Because it's a huge ulcer, will you consider Candida as a first diagnosis after seeing the endoscopy report?
So,
Dr. Praveen or Dr. Ashray?
Again, could we know?
No, ma'am. The Candida will be last of our differential diagnosis. CMV could be a first possible, I would consider.
Differentials for a large ulcer, it's almost extending almost 5-8 centimeters, no? Circumferential. Would you consider malignant? What are the typical characteristics of an ulcer, say viral versus malignancy? This is typical OSCE, okay?
Okay. Usually, malignant ulcer will have a rounded tipped margin with necrotic base, which may be involving circumferential in the esophagus. Whereas the infective ulcers maybe sometimes they come as a multiple small ulcers with.
How will you differentiate CMV, HSV, and EBV? Just tell us that.
Usually, HSV ulcer will be multiple volcanic ulcers. They used to say will have multiple ulcers. You can see sometimes they can coalesce into and form single ulcer also.
So in this patient, what will be your differential? No? So just tell the, see, you have to tabulate. No, they'll say what are your differentials and tabulate, and tell us what will be the histology. That will be the question here.
Yes, CMV, herpes infection, or malignancy like Kaposi's or Kaposi's sarcoma, or a malignant ulcer I will consider.
And so malignancy also.
Yes, ma'am.
I think idiopathic ulcers also will have to be considered because idiopathic ulcers are also known. Probably at the moment we do not know the diagnosis, but in HIV, idiopathic large ulcers in the esophagus is also known.
One question to Dr. Praveen.
Yes, sir.
If you were the endoscopist, apart from taking biopsy, what other specimens would you acquire during your procedure?
I would take for AFB staining or PCR for ruling out tuberculosis.
Okay. And you have to take specimen for TB PCR, AFB culture, and also CMV tissue PCR can be done.
Yes,
CMV tissue PCR.
Yes, sir, that also you can.
I think the PGs should note down what are all the tests to be done when you do look at an esophageal ulcer. You can start a short notes on what all tests that can be done. Like Dr. Deepak has said that you should also look for, Then I want somebody to comment on role of endosonography in these people. Of course, here it is very clear, large ulcer. But I think in a tubercular ulcer, if there is a regional lymph node involvement, or some people early esophageal cancer with endosonography try to look at lymph nodal involvement, muscular involvement, so that they can plan for surgery. And if there is a muscular involvement, they may not do very well. So I think there is I'm not very good in US. I only hear and see, but I think there is a significant role of US when you're planning for surgery for some of these people. Deepak, would you comment on that?
Sir, yes, sir, definitely. But I would rather go for a CT chest, especially when I consider lymphoma, tuberculosis. I would do a CT chest. We recently had one patient with the Crohn's disease who was on azathioprine and mesalamine, continued to have weight loss. So we did colonoscopy, active ulcers were there, but something felt wrong. We did a CT abdomen also. Multiple knots were there in the upper abdomen. We did an EUS FNB and confirmed that he has got a TB reactivation. But during the endoscopy, this guy also had an esophageal fistula. A big hole was seen in the esophagus, and the CT chest showed so many calcified knots in the anterior mediastinum, forming a fistula tract. It curves around the esophagus and forms a fistula to the esophagus. So thoracic imaging is important.
So I'll tell you two interesting experiences of mine. There was a lady who was transported from a big distance because of a uncontrolled severe odynophagia, and the CT chest showed a large mediastinal mass like lymph nodal mass pressing the esophagus. And then I took all the precautions to do an endoscopy, and she was having severe adenophasia. You can't believe the severity. She was crying with pain. So I said, anesthetized and did the endoscopy. And suddenly, while I was doing endoscopy, suddenly pus bursted like anything. So it was a large mediastinal tubercular abscess, which was actually. And after recovery, she says, I'm perfectly all right. I would like to have my dinner. So this is something. The second one recently, I think I maybe I will show you some next time. We had a patient who has got a large aortic aneurysm and a stent was put, and he started leaking into the duodenum. And so it is very important that you should know that when they put stent, now we have an esophageal ulcer, which is actually esophago-aortic fistula. And yesterday I saw one journal article. They were applying multiple clips for an esophageal ulcer. While they were applying, even the atrium was caught. And now the patient died. The autopsy showed that the clips were actually catching the atrium. So I want you to be careful. Such funny things can happen when you do. It's very important.
In an HIV infection and in an HIV negative patient, if you find large esophageal ulcers, what are the possibilities?
Can any resident take up as a challenge? Because there is no point in we answering because we defend ourselves.
Yeah.
Sir, I would like to consider first pill-induced esophagitis, ulcer, and viral infections also should be considered.
Okay.
Kurul, I just wanted to ask, do you know what drugs cause pill esophagitis?
Doxycycline will be.
Doxycycline. You know why it causes?
Because once you don't take, it will stuck inside the mucosa. Once you don't take water along, one glass of water along with the doxycycline, it can erode.
No, but only have. Everybody takes tablets. Does it happen with everyone?
Capsule. It's a capsule.
Everybody takes a capsule. Everybody takes a capsule. But why should it happen with doxycycline? Actually, if you see pill esophagitis, at least in Indian experience, 70 to 80% are related to doxycycline, and it appears as early as 3 to 4 days. So what happened? This doxycycline monohydrate, it is a very severe alkaline powder. So it produces almost a corrosive injury there. Now, the last one which I was about to tell is there was a boy who took active battery. That's a very big battery in the games. This is a 7-year-old boy. And, there is a small difference between uncharged batteries and charged batteries. When you swallow a new charged batteries, the positive negative unites there in the mucosa, and it caused severe mucosal ulceration, and that boy died of perforation. By the time we realized what is happening, he actually died. So it all depends on some people who swallow batteries get stuck up in the lower end of the esophagus. If it is a charged battery, you end up in perforation.
So what was the histology in this patient? Histology?
The histology was inconclusive. We were not very sure. I couldn't dare to say it's an idiopathic ulcer, but I requested the HIV consultant to alter the dose so that this is a follow-up only about 1 month. We thought we'll do an endoscopy after 6 weeks to find out. Maybe we can tell the follow-up in the next class, or maybe a couple of pictures. I'll send it to Varghese to show what happened.
Any specific treatment was offered?
No, he was not given any except sucralfate. We requested the HIV people saying that this all could be HIV people. If maybe he non-responder, could you check up? But then when we looked at the viral load, it was 2,400. They said he seems to be responding. I wasn't sure. I'm not good experienced. So I think we have to wait. I'm not sure what anybody could have done.
Sir, Sidovudin. Sidovudin is also known to produce esophageal ulcers.
Yes.
Sir, was the immunohistochemistry done for CMV in this case? Immunohistochemistry?
No, not done. Now we send the sample. I asked them. I think we'll get it.
For the PGs, from where will you take the biopsies?
For CMV from the base of the ulcer, and for HSV from the edge of the ulcer.
So the dictum is that you should take both from the edges and also from the base. Otherwise, you can miss in the biopsies.
That's a good point. Good point. Varghese, you will take over now. I think I don't know, Jayanti Madam's concluding remarks to be.
I think, yeah, the differentials was well discussed. But I think exam going PGs just prepare in the form of an OSCE. What they will do is they'll keep this video and they will just say patient is retroviral infection case and this is the endoscopy. So what are your differentials? What would be your possible line of management? So the question is just this. It's a typical OSCE. So I think they should prepare that, and the literature was well described by Dr. Akshay. So I think a very good case for an
Yes.
OSCE as a short case.
Yes,
For a
ma'am.
good description. Some of the differentials has to be excluded, like some of the esophagitis and all, usually they don't cause such large ulcers. In relation to HIV is what you have to discuss, and then you say unrelated to HIV. That
Yeah.
will be two differentials there.
How about that?
Yeah.
I think what Madam said is a point that you talk individual ulcer disease of the esophagus causing dysphagia. In a non-HIV patient, there would be slightly different in terms of allocating the priority of which could be the etiology. But I think what Akshay mentioned is all the various causes of dysphagia, which normally we encounter. You also look at the textbook. This is the best time. The best way to prepare is go back, check your Schlesinger or whatever you want to do. Go and write a short notes and make a algorithm how to approach a dysphagia. Couple of points is we used to do barium swallow. Now, if you want to do a barium study, it has to be under fluoroscopy, and it's usually, when the endoscopy is normal, we might resort to barium dynamic study to see flow pattern, and sometimes achalasia is missed, but you may do barium. And of course, you extend your discussion on the manometry in different esophageal disorders. Today, we just concentrated on looking at esophagus as one of our target organ. And
Other thing is, read about
yes,
immunohistochemistry. I think that
yes,
point was well taken. Immunohistochemistry in a patient.
Deepak did mention that you look for CMV, and I think Dr. Ismail also nicely mentioned that you take biopsies from different sources. I think Varghese, you will make your last comment on this.
Did brush cytology help?
No, in this case, because anti-tubercular treatment was given earlier, we did not consider it actively. But if it comes as a de novo case of ulcer, we have to consider TB ulcer or the esophagus also. Being
Yes,
HIV positive patient,
yes,
they may have higher chance.
yes,
That
yes,
also will have to be actively considered.
yes.
Role of brush cytology?
We have not done. This is just quickly I presented only.
No, sir, I'm just asking.
Yeah.
I mean, what is the role? What would be the role?
Would anybody like to answer Madam's question? Role of breast cytology.
I'll get some information.
Breast cytology. I think because the ulcer is there and we can take easily lot of tissues, and probably there is very little role for breast cytology. Because it can be easily accessed by biopsy and you will get lot of specimen for all different types of tests. So tissue access is not a problem here.
There are a few endoscopists. What they do is they quickly do breast cytology, do endoscopy side microscopy to see for malignancy. I mean, some people do it. So Varghese, I think we can close the case if you agree.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much.
I must thank Jayanti, Deepak, Ismail.
Sunil, switch off. Sunil, mute your. Sunil, please mute. Dr. Sunil, please mute.
Thank you, madam. Thanks very much for your presence.
Now, can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yes, sir, we can see it.
Yes.
Okay. Let me see. Now, next set is OSCE, and these OSCE sets are provided by Professor Sethubabu, and the questions will be asked by Professor Sethubabu, Dr. Ismail, Professor Jayanti, and Deepak also can ask questions. The first session of OSCE will be to Dr. Kuruvilla. Dr. Kuruvilla, are you ready?
Sir, ready?
Okay.
Krula, take care. Just read carefully. Whenever an OSCE question is given, first read carefully. Make a scribble certain points before you jump at it. They give you exactly around 8 minutes to go through the whole thing. So plan your journey nicely. This is where it is going to happen. Couple of years from now, everything would be OSCE system. So read.
Krula, you can read it loud so that others will also benefit.
Okay, sir.
Right.
Case 1, a 39-year-old woman working as a teacher was seen in outpatient clinic for evaluation of progressive onset of jaundice and abnormal liver enzyme. She was even essentially asymptomatic until 6 to 7 months ago, but complained of occasional itching. Her appetite is good and her weight has been stable. She denies any abdominal pain, fever, and chills. She also noted recent change in urine, which is darker, or stool color, which is paler. She has no other medical problems and is not taken any other medications. She has undergone laparoscopic cholecystectomy 2 years ago for pain right upper abdomen with the diagnosis of chronic cholecystitis, although no records are available. She recalls being jaundiced at that time, but she made a full recovery. There is no family history of liver disease or cancer, no history of ERCP before or after surgery. On examination, she looks well. Vital signs are essentially normal. She weighs around 60 kg. Her blood pressure and pulse are normal. There is no icterus. There is 3 centimeter smooth non-tender hepatomegaly. There is no splenomegaly. No free fluid in the abdomen. Cardiovascular system and respiratory systems were normal. So, sir, lab studies, hemoglobin is 14.7. Total count is 10,500 with the predominantly neutrophil of 54%, platelet of 1.25 lakhs, INR 1.3, bilirubin 3.8, predominantly conjugated. AST is 168, ALT is 185, alkaline phosphatase is 365, GGT is 187, and albumin is 3.8, creatinine is 1.4. Ultrasound on the abdomen showed hepatomegaly, no IHBRD, gallbladder not visualized, CBD not clearly visible, no splenomegaly, no free fluid.
What are the clinical possibilities?
Sir, can I see the first slide, sir?
You want to go?
Yes, sir.
Are you seeing?
Yeah, sir, I am seeing, sir.
So in
I
the
don't think
exam,
I get back. What are you dealing with? Just tell that. What are you dealing with?
Sir, madam, she 39-year-old with
What
a
are you dealing with?
painless,
No more.
painless progressive jaundice, madam.
What are you dealing with?
She's having a painless progressive jaundice.
What are you dealing with?
Okay, madam, painless progressive jaundice. So it is a intrahepatic cholestasis.
Dealing with a cholestatic jaundice. So
Cholestatic jaundice.
you are dealing with a cholestatic jaundice.
Cholestatic jaundice.
That can be
Intrahepatic or extrahepatic, madam. Since there is no abdominal.
Now differentiate between the two.
Since there is no abdominal pain, I would like to rule out the extrahepatic, and I would like to consider intrahepatic since it is a painless progressive jaundice with itching.
What are your differentials for intrahepatic?
Predominantly, I will initially consider a viral etiology in this madam. 39-year-old. I would like to consider hepatitis B.
Hepatitis B. Continue, madam. Continue, madam. You are a very tough and good examiner, madam.
Madam.
An examiner. So
viral etiology is the one I would like to consider, madam. Hepatitis B and C.
What will be the clinical picture?
Yeah. Can you consider viral in this patient? Come on.
Madam,
it is 6
to be prodromal phase followed by.
This is a patient who had 6 to 7 months history.
Other differentials also I would like to consider autoimmune etiology all primary biliary cirrhosis also,
Uh,
and autoimmune hepatitis also.
Kuruvilla, I'll give you a small tip.
Okay,
Whenever
sir.
you want to make your diagnosis,
Okay, sir.
give your first possibility number one.
Okay,
Why
sir.
the possibility is possibly correct and why the possibility not correct. You go step by step. You can consider all possible diseases in this case.
Okay,
now,
sir.
there are a couple of clues in this, which is that she had a post-cholecystectomy
Dr.
stage.
Sethubabu, just one
Madam.
minute. I request none of the audience not to put anything in the chat box for the differentials, okay? Then the candidate cannot discuss. You can ask questions, but you cannot give all your differentials and all that, all right? Yeah.
Thank you, madam. So you keep every possibility, explain why are you thinking that particular possibility. So as in, suppose I am the examiner, I want to know what is all best you know about it.
Okay, sir.
Keep on moving. Don't allow me to interrupt you so that I can listen to you what all you know till you say these are my coned down diagnosis. This is what I feel.
Okay,
Take
sir. Varghese,
yeah.
sir, can I see the second slide, sir?
This is what also I told you, that you scribble while the slide is coming up.
Okay,
You
sir.
scribble somewhere. You
Okay,
can't
sir.
ask in the examination to go back.
Okay,
Once
sir.
they show the slide, you can't go back.
Okay, sir. Sir, since it's a patient has undergone a laparoscopic cholecystectomy 2 years back and a painless progressive jaundice with pruritus in a 39-year-old female, I would also like to consider initial possibility as benign biliary stricture. Is one of the primary possibilities I would like to consider, and I will also keep in mind primary biliary cirrhosis as well as a second possibility.
No. Why primary biliary cirrhosis? We are dealing with a cholestatic type of liver disease. You have missed, for example, I'll put a straightforward, though I'm not supposed to do that. What happened to primary sclerosing cholangitis, which is there? What happened?
You'll be
Madam.
as tough as you are in the exam, no? That's the way it is.
Madam. Madam,
I think he means secondary biliary cirrhosis.
He means no, but
let him discuss.
Okay.
Let him,
Madam.
Yeah, okay. Carry on, Kuruvilla.
Points which are against the possibility of benign biliary stricture are
Kuruvilla, say points in favor first, followed by
okay,
points
sir.
against.
Okay. Benign biliary stricture is a history of 6 to 7 months following post-cholecystectomy with a painless progressive jaundice with the cholestatic picture, with the history of pruritus and altered color of urine and stools.
Most important is it is temporarily associated.
Okay, madam. Temporary.
That's first possibility because it is temporarily associated. All the symptoms started after a certain period after cholecystectomy.
Okay.
And you initially told extrahepatic as well as it could be intrahepatic also.
Intrahepatic cholestasis.
Only one feature which differentiates extrahepatic and intrahepatic.
Abdominal
that
pain.
is cholangitis. If patient has a history of cholangitis, that means the cause is extrahepatic cholestasis. So this patient did she ever have a history of cholangitis?
She doesn't have any history of any cholangitis.
Any fever with chills, that is
no.
cholangitis, or any smoldering cholangitis like tiredness.
No fever with chills.
Okay,
no
proceed.
fever.
Loss of appetite. Okay.
Dr. Kuruvilla, are you there?
Sir, I'm there. And another possibility I would like to consider is I would like to know any hepatitis C is also one of the possibilities I would like to consider in this patient.
Yeah, where are you talking about hepatitis C? I think he's going. Who's the other person? Praveen, take over.
Yes, ma'am.
Praveen, please.
Actually, this is a case of progressive cholestasis. First possible is primary biliary cholangitis because the patient is a female with the main symptom of pruritus and chronic progression of jaundice is there. And I will consider next will be an autoimmune hepatitis with overlap symptoms. Then no history regarding any alternative medicine intake or anything was not. So then
What are the other intrahepatic causes? Can it be benign recurrent intrahepatic cholestasis?
benign recurrent, the presentation it is to recurrent if it was from childhood.
Recurrent. This is the first attack. Can it be granulomatous hepatitis?
Granulomatous.
You have to consider all. First and foremost, as Dr. Sethubabu said, you have to keep talking. If you don't talk, that's it. Even in OSCE, there is one last case is always virtual. Not virtual, I mean, you're in person. So that time you have to keep talking. I considered intrahepatic for the following reasons. I consider extrahepatic for the following reasons. My differentials for intrahepatic are these. Points favoring intrahepatic are these, and therefore my differentials are these. Unless you speak, with one case you'll just be hanging on for. Dr. VT, Dr. Sethubabu.
Can you, Praveen and Kurvilla, can I propose cholangiocarcinoma, which is a slow-growing lesion? Can I consider cholangiocarcinoma? I don't want to miss it. Very well known.
Sir, age group and no is against the presentation, sir.
The absence of cholangitis will make me uncomfortable to make a benign biliary stricture because they're often accompanied by cholangitis-like picture. You need to tell me some other possibilities like, having had a cholecystectomy, could there be a CBD stone? Could there be a stricture of the CBD? Could there be a primary sclerosing cholangitis? Or is it a cholangiocarcinoma? That forms one group taking cholecystectomy as madam said, you also think of cholestatic liver parenchymal diseases which mimic like a like a obstructive jaundice, which includes autoimmune hepatitis, granulomatous hepatitis. So if you look at the lab, you might change your opinion, but until now in the examination discussion, you must go on giving me a lot of data which starting with 1, 2, 3, 4, scribble in one point, start saying everything. Then I know that you know many things. So I don't want to fail at all at any cost. I want to pass you. So all my questions. When madam said, for example, is it possible to have granulomatous hepatitis? Think for a minute and say, yes, it is possible because of this reason. For example, cholestasis is less common in a granulomatous hepatitis. So again, so you use certain words which can help you in the examination. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Dr. Deepak here. Last but not the least, so am I audible?
Yeah, please.
You are.
Sir,
go
I
on.
think as last possibility, we can also consider infiltrative liver disease like lymphoma, leukemia, sarcoid, and amyloidosis. So any constitutional symptoms.
Yeah, if you don't have, for example, in this case, data like ultrasound or MRCP or ERCP, for a clinical discussion, you need all these things to be considered so that I know as an exam appearing candidate that you have so much of subject with you. That's what gives me impression.
One thing I want to say is, this is Rajesh. So jaundice is a very late event in PBC. So I don't think we should put it as a first in the first list.
PBC is also very rare here.
Yeah,
very
rare
rare.
and very late. Jaundice occurs quite late with failure and all.
And
PSC could be
whoever mentioned about HBV, HCV and all, how often have you seen, doctor, HBV in your 3 years course, HBV and HCV presenting as cholestatic jaundice? Never, ever make such mistakes.
Very
There'll
important.
be no questioning after this, I'm telling you. I'll be very firm and strict on this. There'll be no questioning after this. They'll say, how many cases of HCV have you seen as cholestatic? Please do not make such mistakes. Never, ever make such mistakes.
Can we proceed?
Yeah, sir, Varghese sir, you should proceed. We are actually stuck. I think we made a very good comments. What madam said, I just want to reaffirm. Don't bring B and C into this. Keep it at the end. If somebody asks a question, don't bring into discussion in a typical cholestatic post cholecystectomy case like this. Okay, go ahead.
Sir, how proceed further? Initially, I would like to do an ultrasound examination, and to ultrasound examination already done showed hepatomegaly, no IHBRD was there.
What will you do? Alphas and gamma GT is elevated. What's your next investigation? Alphas.
I would like to
mild elevation of AST/ALT, mild missing of, and at 1.3 I think was INR. So what is your conclusion with the LFT? What is your conclusion with LFT?
Cholestatic pattern, madam.
What cholestatic? There is what is predominant here? Alphas and gamma GT is striking.
Predominant. Striking.
So what investigation will you do now if you want to take over? When the ultrasound is normal, that means you almost excluded extrahepatic. So now in intrahepatic, when will you get raised alphas and gamma GT? What's the next investigation of choice?
I would like to do a further imaging in the form of MR.
Come on, yeah. What lab investigations will you do here? You're always after lab. Please, not imaging, no imaging. What investigations will you do? What were your differentials?
Intrahepatic.
What other investigations will you do to come to a diagnosis? Patient has hepatocellular in combination with raised alphas and gamma GT. So what's the next investigation?
Could you do some autoimmune markers, for example?
Sir, autoimmune markers, sir. We'd like to do anti-SMA, anti-LKM, and anti-LC1 with ANA.
The first one you missed.
ANA with ANA. ANA and SMA for.
First and foremost, you'll ask for serum IgG.
IgG.
That's the first investigation you ask, no? So you need to know what's the albumin and globulin. So what was the globulin in this patient? I don't remember. What was the globulin?
Sir, globulin.
Globulin is not mentioned here.
Yeah. I know albumin is 3.8. I don't know what was the globulin.
Okay, what all investigation will you do, Dr. Kurula? What do you think you will do?
Sir, autoimmune workup including IgG as a possibility. Then other investigation I would like to do is liver biopsy to look for to find out the cause of intrahepatic cholestasis.
Information you get on liver biopsy.
Madam, since we are considering the possibility of autoimmune hepatitis,
when you are considering what are the possibilities?
Interface hepatitis, autoimmune hepatitis, features of interface hepatitis,
serology is negative. Serology is negative, then?
Madam?
If
Pardon?
serology is negative.
Okay, madam. Serology is negative, then I have to liver biopsy, and in the liver biopsy, I have looked for interface hepatitis, erythropoiesis.
Dr. VT, just help him. Dr. Ismail.
Rosetting and.
You're all examiners. So all of you help him.
So in a liver biopsy in such a patient with cholestatic symptoms, a simple straightforward autoimmune hepatitis will not be our first diagnosis. It has to be an overlap. We have to look for other features, whether there's a cholestatic, chronic cholestatic syndromes, whether there's any sclerosing cholangitis, whether there's an
PBC,
autoimmune, PBC, all those secondary biliary cirrhosis, all those things.
PBC, florid duct lesions will be there, sir. And in PBC, along with autoimmune hepatitis, if you are suspecting overlap syndromes.
Percentage of PBC present with cholestatic jaundice?
Less than 20%.
20%. What is the
less than 10%.
What is the most common presentation of PBC?
Fatigue.
When will you suspect PBC?
Middle-aged woman comes with fatigue, madam.
And then?
Pruritus.
Pruritus. Okay.
Then some extra articular presentation, extra manifestations.
Continue.
Then, madam, that is a liver biopsy finding I would like to look for, followed by to rule out PSC, I would like to look for imaging of the ductal in the form of MRCP, like to find out
And
any
can
strictures.
it be an IgG4 cholangiopathy?
IgG4 level, IgG4 cholangiopathy is also a possibility, madam. intrahepatic cholestasis with presentation can be there.
And it will be AIDS-related cholangiopathy. These are all the things that you have to discuss and understand.
Okay, madam. Okay, madam.
DG4 and all can present just like this.
Okay, madam.
What will be the MRCP finding and IgG for cholangiopathy?
Multiple strictures with dilatation, sir.
Okay. What will be that of sclerosing cholangitis?
Both intra and hepatic, both intrahepatic and extrahepatic strictures with upstream dilatations.
Okay, strictures and dilated areas. Okay. Now look at this MRCP and try to interpret.
Okay, upstream
Sir,
dilatation, okay? You don't describe upstream. You get some dilatation and some strictures.
okay, sir. Okay, madam. Okay, madam.
Like bleeding. It
Okay,
may also be small duct and large duct disease. It can be a simple intrahepatic multiple strictures also if it is a small.
Finding here.
Madam, perihilar area seems to be obscured, suggestive of lesion.
So what do you think? Is it? What do you think of the disease now? Is it?
It's not a stricture, sir.
Why do you say it is not a stricture?
It can be. Yes, can be long, more than 2 centimeter.
It is fairly longer than what you expect in a stricture.
Yeah, longer, sir.
Okay. So what are the other differential diagnoses?
Perihilar cholangiocarcinoma, sir.
So cholangiocarcinoma, yes. Any other differentials?
It happens with the IHBR, with this cholangiocarcinoma.
Okay, madam. Any perihilar lymph node compressing, extrinsic causes compressing the lesion, sir?
There is no upstream dilatation, no?
Madam, no HBRD is there.
Can we have the next slide, sir? I mean,
MRCP picture shows irregular narrowing localized to the common hepatic duct and the hilum. Feature is consistent with the hilar structure, commonly associated with cholangiocarcinoma and rarely sclerosing cholangitis.
What next?
Very important to relieve the symptoms of the patient, sir.
So can you do some tumor markers?
Okay, sir.
See,
prognostic values, sir.
No, you don't worry about it. When I ask a question,
okay, sir.
Then look at the question, and
okay,
then
sir.
you suddenly I saw you missed the answering. You might quickly jump and say, I might get some positivity with CEA, CA99. All these things could be falsely elevated or falsely not. I mean, negative also. But again, I want you to know that you know it. I'm not depending on that. Actually, that case and this picture may not correlate to, since it's an educational exercise, we brought in this. I just prepared this for an educational exercise. Now you know that PSC and cholangiocarcinoma quite often overlaps. So I would have expected you to say, how do we make, so can we use tumor biomarkers as one? And can I get a tissue for histopathology? How do I get the tissue for histopathology in this case?
I would like to do since it's a perihilar lesion with the ERCP with cholangioscope with brush cytology, I would like to get the tissue biopsy from this for this patient, sir.
Can you do CT guided?
CT guided, yes, sir. CT guided, yes. CT guided, we can do CT guided.
So all the you should
okay, sir.
mention.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir.
If it is cholangiocarcinoma, what type of cholangiocarcinoma? What type is it?
I think, sir, intraductal papillary.
No, basically this is a perihilar cholangiocarcinoma. So what type?
The bismuth type.
Oh, bismuth. Okay, sir. Bismuth. Wait. One. Bismuth 2.
What happens to the what happened to the right duct and left duct? You can see the separate.
Right duct and left duct can be visualized, sir.
Is it the main right?
Main trunk is involved with the Common hepatic duct, sir.
No, here you can see the common hepatic duct is gone. You can see the right and left is gone. You can see the separation of the left ducts.
Type 4.
As well as, yeah, so it looks like a type 4.
Type 4, sir.
May I ask one question to Kuruvula? So here you have an MRCP and two possibilities are kept. That's a hilar structure due to cholangiocarcinoma or a benign condition like a sclerosing cholangitis. So based on the imaging, what would be your pick? A benign structure or a malignant structure?
Since it's the type 4 involving multiple areas and involving perihelium, I would like to think it as a cholangiocarcinoma, sir.
So one thing is that if it were a cholangiocarcinoma, you would have seen extensive intrahepatic biliary radical dilatation, which is not there in this patient.
Okay, sir.
Because this patient had post cholecystectomy, would you still consider a benign stricture?
But multiple areas, extensive area involvement of both right and left duct. With
what happens when you have a vascular insult during cholecystectomy?
Okay, sir. Least vascular supply is to the common hepatic duct, upper part, but right and left duct cannot be involved. So many collaterals are there.
I probably you also need to learn a bit about saying something about use of spyglass in these people. Some may be aggressive. Some people might do to have a direct histology from the tumor if it, with a spyglass.
Okay.
Sojan, are you there?
Yes, sir.
I am not able to forward the slides. You may please project from the other side.
Okay, sir.
Anything else to be discussed in this case? How do you confirm the diagnosis? He said ERCP blood cytology and cholangioscopy biopsy. Okay. Any role for EUS?
Yes, I think the answer should be yes.
Yes,
and
sir.
Probably what all the residents should do. Now you saw how difficult sometimes what is seen is so simple, appears to be direct, but when the questions are asked, we don't have some very, very good positive answers. We always funk, yes, this is possible, yes, that is possible. Even now, we don't have a very good answer to say, no, this is all primary sclerosing cholangitis, this is all cholangiocarcinoma. So all these things I think we still have. So we need to have a better, answer for all these things. So I want you to, learn more about these things and have a positive answer in the examination.
Sir, may I make a question to my co-faculty?
Yes, sir.
This patient had a cholecystectomy and has cholestatic jaundice. The ultrasound does not show intrahepatic biliary radical dilatation. So just like Jayanti madam asked, should we have gone for this autoimmune panel antimitochondrial antibody, that is a serology testing, or the MRCP? Which one should we have? Should the student have presented next from a student's perspective?
Yeah, if I am examiner, as Jayanti madam said, you must complete all the possible serological tests which are there and what would be likely to happen. Suppose the first test which madam wanted, the immunoglobulin levels and ANA, if they are positive, he changes his direction towards a liver biopsy. But if both are negative, he would change his direction to MRCP. That's my answer.
Okay, sir.
I think the hierarchical order of doing the investigation should be strictly followed in the examination.
Okay, sir.
So what Kuruvilla did was he didn't go in and out. You could see Kuruvilla who's now. Are you appearing for the exam now, Kuruvilla? Somewhere
yes,
down?
sir. I'm somewhere down.
Now I wanted to, like, a true teacher. You see, it's such a common case how you got stumbled. Every day you see these kind of cases. But suddenly in the examination, when so many people are asking questions, your entire thing wasn't very confident. You know probably everything. I'm not saying you do not know. But putting them in an order, convincing me that you know so much was missing. And then suddenly I start thinking, was he trained properly? Did he learn properly? So you gave me such an impression. But I know you are a very sincere, good student because you know certain things, but you are not able to put it in order. One of our Jayanti madams or mine or Ismail or Varghese is to see how you feel when you are suddenly put before a case which is so common. So you understand, everyone should understand how it becomes difficult when you face 3 or 4 examiners with so many questions being asked. Take care of that.
Okay, sir.
Then proceed to the next case.
Yeah, we are ready.
Okay.
You can speak.
Management. What was the management in that patient?
Okay.
We're proceeding. Okay, continue.
No,
Biopsy came as hilar cholangiocarcinoma, is it?
Yeah. Yes. There was a sequential change. So these are some of the questions like, do you do cholangioscopy, brush cytology, biopsy, special stains, and role of US? I think these things they can read, and if Varghese agrees, probably.
These are the potential questions. Is there a need for stent? Purula.
Sir, stent to relieve the patient of symptoms, we need to place the patient with, since it's hilar cholangiocarcinoma, metallic, self-expanding metallic stent should be the.
Would you not stage the patient? I think patient is only 39 years old.
First, you always assess the operability of the lesion.
Exactly. Patient is 39 years old.
Cholangiocarcinoma. Okay. Involvement of sir, resectability of cholangiocarcinoma should be assessed with the involvement of whether the lobes are atrophied of unilateral portal vein or bilateral.
No, operability does not look at the atrophy of the. You have to see the vasculature, the ducts, portal vein, and then you assess the operability.
Okay.
So there is one practical issue which I thought I'll tell you. If you are actually planning for a surgical assessment, in the absence of cholangitis, you may not resort to stent in these people. You probably look more possibility of a surgery, young patient. There is one objection that would come is associated portal vein thrombosis in these people if it is a malignancy, and that would become a relative contraindication nowadays. Earlier we used to say, maybe at our time we used to say presence of portal vein thrombosis is a contraindication, but now people do thrombectomy and do many other things. I think these are the questions which you need to know. If you want to put a stent, you postpone it till you assess surgery, and you also decide if you are reached a point, then you might think of putting a SEMS as your priority, because young patient, you get a wider drainage, surgery to be assessed. And some of these people now, the cholangiocarcinomas even have intrabiliary placement of local radiation therapy, post-operative chemoradiation. You can put actually through catheter, you can give a loco-regional therapy there, and systemic chemotherapy. I think these are the areas which you need to study. Now you go back, if your exam going, go back and make one good notes on simple few steps, and you need to answer every question. You need to get an answer of 1 page, write down. So a common case like cholangiocarcinoma suddenly confused you so much is a very important lesson you need to learn.
Absolutely, I agree, Dr. Sethubabu. Absolutely. Everything. This is the simplest case that you can come across in an exam. Simplest case.
Thank you, madam.
I think residents must be absolutely thorough in the management of a cholestatic bar obstructive jaundice. I think and the examiners will be very aggressive because it's a very common problem which we see day in and day out. So obstructive jaundice or a cholestatic jaundice, prepare thoroughly. That is my advice to all of you.
Yeah. Yes.
Stop, okay. Dr. VT, we want to discuss one more slide.
You want to discuss, or you want to postpone to the next session?
One more case till 9:30.
Oh yeah. Okay, you can proceed. I'm ready.
Okay, next is Praveen. Ready?
Yes, sir. I'm ready, sir.
Okay, please read.
So the patient is a 30-year-old woman who presented with recurrent abdominal pain and loose stool. She experienced the symptoms since adolescence with a period of improvement and worsening over the years. Over the past 1 year, her symptoms have been occurring more frequently with greater severity. For the past 6 months, she has been bothered by bloating sensation. The bloating seems to worsen with the food intake.
Next slide.
She has episodic abdominal pain. The patient describes it as 6 out of 10 scale at its worst. Acute worsening occurs immediately before defecation with significant improvement after defecation. She has had this pain at least once every week for the past 6 months with the loose stools approximately 1/3 of the time and often has 2 or 3 bowel movements per day. She has no nocturnal diarrhea, no blood in stools. She has had no nausea, vomiting, or change in weight. No relationship of symptoms with her diet, including milk products, spicy foods, etc. She has no chronic illness or prior surgeries. She has no family history of inflammatory bowel disease, cancer, or celiac disease. On physical examination, weight 56 kg, blood pressure is 108 per 70 millimeter mercury, pulse is 70 beats per minute, and respiratory rate is 12 breaths per minute. Physical examination reveals a comfortable appearing woman in no acute distress. The patient has a soft abdomen, not distended, not tender, no mass or acromegaly, and not bowel sound. Parectal examination is normal.
So just stop. Okay. Even next is okay. Next is also okay.
Basic workup including complete blood cell count, basic metabolic profile are within the normal reference range. Routine stool examination normal and negative for occult blood, and X-ray chest KEB are normal, and ultrasound scan abdomen is essentially normal.
Okay, we'll start discussion.
Okay. So I have a middle-aged female with a chronic history of loose stool, chronic history of loose stools along with abdominal pain and bloating as main symptoms. My first possible differential diagnosis will be an irritable bowel syndrome because her symptoms with typical abdominal pain, which is associated with defecation and change in consistency of stool and frequent.
Irritable bowel syndrome in this patient.
Yes,
First discuss is large bowel or small bowel.
Okay. So her symptoms is more of a large bowel symptoms with frequent defecation, less quantity of stools, and her symptoms of typical abdominal pain, which is related with defecation, is there. And her symptoms started from adolescence, and it is severity is also over the past 6 months and 1 year without any significant alarm symptoms is there for her.
What are the causes of abdominal pain with diarrhea? Give your differentials.
Abdominal pain with diarrhea, any infectious diarrhea like traveler's diarrhea.
Traveler's diarrhea. Come on, Ravi. What are we talking? Come on.
Infectious diarrhea like salmonella, shigella.
No, this is a chronic diarrhea, no?
One of you take over.
Ulcerative colitis.
The chronic diarrhea, it's not acute diarrhea. It has been there for quite some time. You said correctly from the symptomatology, abdominal pain, urge to defecate is a colonic diarrhea. Our question is that what are the differential diagnoses for a colonic diarrhea in this patient? It's a theoretical question.
Yes, my next probable diagnosis will be an irritable.
Are you there, Praveen?
Yes, sir, I'm here, sir. Inflammatory bowel disease.
Praveen, are you there?
Sir, can you hear me, sir? Hello?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, sir. Inflammatory bowel disease. IBD like ulcerative colitis can present, and other symptoms like pain with ulcers will be an tuberculosis. Then small intestine bacterial overgrowth can present with bloating, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. Then
inflammatory bowel disease, which one you said? Ulcerative colitis or Crohn's?
Ulcerative colitis is more than Crohn's.
You think it is ulcerative colitis, but there is no blood in the stools. How often you get ulcerative colitis without blood in the stools?
Not so common.
So that cannot be first, no? If you say Crohn's, I may accept. But ulcerative colitis will be difficult to accept in the absence of blood in the stools.
You said not so common. So how often would you get diarrhea without blood in the stool in ulcerative colitis with no urgency, no tenesmus? This is the way the exam will go on. The way the exam will go.
Okay, you said Crohn's, tuberculosis?
The tuberculosis also possible. The tuberculosis, small intestine bacterial overgrowth, SIBO.
First you said it is large bowel. Now you're going to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Then you're talking of Crohn's. Then you're moving to ulcerative colitis. Just see the way the discussion is going on. No?
Okay.
So just follow the symptoms and then say that the points for small bowel are these, points for large bowel are these. In this patient, a combination of this, my differentials would be these. And if it is colonic, my differentials would be these. That's all that you have to explain.
Okay.
And here, to the extent they said everything is normal.
Yes, no, everything is.
Okay, you said some alarm signs and symptoms. What are those?
Presence of weight loss, blood in stools, loss of appetite, and nocturnal diarrhea that awakes from the sleep. Family history of any malignancy.
Okay. And
What are the characteristic features of IBS?
IBS usually typically presents with change in the consistency and frequency of stool, along with an abdominal pain, which can increase or decrease with that defecation.
What percentage of patients do not have abdominal pain? That's what Uday Ghoshal has changed. No, there's no longer term called pain. It's more of discomfort. The entire ROM4 criteria has changed. No. The whole what would be the typical in an outpatient clinic? When will you say that this patient could be an IBS case?
Patient with more of a altered frequency of stools, which is alternating, which is intermittently getting normal and then worsening with typical bloating symptoms and abdominal pain, with normal lab parameters as well as alarm symptoms.
What are the types of IBS?
IBS constipation, IBS diarrhea, IBS mixed. 3 types of.
So then where do you get the mixed type? You said sometimes diarrhea, sometimes constipation. Is that the presentation of an IBS?
So it depends upon the Bristol stool chart. If the patient's stool comes in the 3 and 4, in between we can it will be classified in the IBS mixed type.
Okay, how will you proceed further?
So her blood investigations, everything is normal. Stool exam is also normal. So ultrasound is also normal. So first thing to rule out colonoscopy, we have to plan to rule out any ulcers like tuberculosis or Crohn's.
Any other laboratory test which you would like to do
Fecal
before
calprotectin, we can check, rule out any inflammatory reasons there are not. Fecal calprotectin, we can check.
In every IBS with diarrhea, one should look for one more condition. What is that?
Thyroid issues, any thyroid function test, we have to check, rule out hypothyroidism.
Yes.
Then.
Okay, fecal calprotectin, if it is available, fine. What does it actually detect?
Fecal calprotectin will detect this calprotectin, which is from the neutrophils secreted by the neutrophil. Neutrophils granulation.
Okay, it is a product of leukocyte in the luminal intestine. So, what are the conditions in which it is positive?
Inflammatory conditions like inflammatory bowel disease or any infections, infectious diarrhea also it can come positive, sir.
So, what is the diagnostic role of fecal calprotectin in a tropical country like India, where GI infection is very common?
In India, the role of main thing is if we
so it is
predominant negative predictive value.
It is no specificity. It may suggest that there is a mucosal inflammation going on, and then we may have to do further testing. Suppose the fecal calprotectin is elevated in this patient. What will you do next?
I will definitely consider to plan for a colonoscopy.
Okay, surgeon. Okay, next.
What is the most like?
Will you consider any of the other differential diagnoses given in the list?
Celiac disease is, but celiac disease patient will have features of malabsorption in the form of weight loss or other nutrition.
You said it is a large bowel diarrhea, and celiac disease has to be small bowel diarrhea, and they may have features of weight loss and malabsorption. May have. Okay. Crohn's disease, is it possible?
Yes, Crohn's can present with an abdominal pain and diarrhea, which may not be blood in stools. That is also possible, but
there is no weight loss and all the parameters are normal.
Normal.
So let's like tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis also with a tropical country, it can present like an abdominal pain, loose stools, but the patient will have other symptoms like weight loss and all will be there. The alarm features are not present.
Neoplasm?
Neoplasm in this age group is very uncommon, and patient is not having any other symptoms of weight loss or blood in stools or any obstructive features.
Okay. Next.
So what is the further course of action? What investigations, alarm symptoms, rational of colonoscopy, how do you work up for SIBO? So my next investigation will be probably, as I told, fecal calprotectin and colonoscopy. Colonoscopy is mainly to rule out other symptoms like microscopic qualities, which can present like abdominal pain and chronic loose stools, which may not have any blood investigation, positive information, which can be picked up only by biopsy. For working up of SIBO, I would like to do breath test to confirm bacterial overgrowth.
Okay, Praveen, let me make a few observations of your presentation. First thing is you have disappointed Jayanti madam the moment you suddenly uttered this is a case of IBS. We know this is a case of IBS, but you should have gone that little slowly, saying first you would like to look at is it a small bowel diarrhea, is it a large bowel diarrhea, or is it is very difficult to say in few cases like Crohn's or tuberculosis. You may not be able to really say. That's a old timer kind of approach, but then you can still have to stick to that because in an OSCE the questions are straightforward. When we come to Viva, then we will say, is it a small bowel diarrhea, large bowel diarrhea? It's very difficult, indeterminate. Sometimes you cannot make a diagnosis. Then you think of organic causes of diarrhea like what we thought, and then go slowly into because many things are absent, I would like to reasonably conclude that there is an important possibility of IBS for the following reasons. The moment you said IBS, we got upset as if you know the diagnosis. And so we didn't like suddenly the way you said IBS. So you should have gone, you probably you know the subject very well. There is no doubt about it. All of you know the subject very well, but put it in the right perspective. Now you see a simple case of IBS suddenly twisted you so much. You didn't organize yourself what could be answer 1, answer 2, answer 3. Then you could have slowly concluded because of the absence of all these things, I would like to consider IBS. Now, there is no investigation for IBS. However, you would like to see if there are red flags, what you could have done. For example, if the fecal occult blood is positive, or that would be an indication for a probably some kind of a procedure like colonoscopy, or if the calprotectin is positive, you think of IBD. So you go very slowly. You became suddenly, very simple case, how it made you confusing. Maybe you couldn't put it in the order. I just want everyone to observe how Praveen, with his reasonable good knowledge, has got confused himself putting them in order. Okay.
What is factitious diarrhea? What will be the presentation and what will be the presentation of microscopic colitis?
Microscopic colitis patient usually females with chronic watery loose stools.
Can it be this patient? Can it be microscopic?
No,
In this case, the microscopic colitis?
It can be possible, ma'am, but which we need colonoscopy and biopsy to confirm.
Therefore, if you just pounce and say that it is IBS, then we'll say that you know the case. No?
Right.
To give my first reaction.
Yes.
And what is factitious diarrhea?
Patient can, it's like due to drug induced or malingering, patient may take drugs to in case of weight loss.
Such as?
Where
you can get pain and you get
laxatives and all.
Such as? Which laxative would cause pain?
Pain.
Some patients may say, when you give a laxative, they say, ma'am, it's not a good one, it causes pain and I pass. Which type of laxative will cause pain?
Hypertension. What are the types of laxatives?
Osmotic laxatives and stimulant laxatives are there.
So between the two, which one will cause pain?
Stimulant laxatives.
Name one stimulant laxative. Name a stimulant laxative.
Bisacodyl. Then
bisulfate.
Sodium bisulfate. then
Dr. Sethubabu is very nicely summarized, okay? Very nicely summarized the problems, you know. I was also a little upset when he suddenly said it was IBS.
One last question. What is spurious diarrhea?
Sir, spurious diarrhea means patient is
or I will make it complicated by asking what is encopresis?
encopresis is in a child fecal incontinence patient is not able to hold, they may seepage of stools from the
That is one of the condition where in fact it is spurious. So they have basically constipation but presenting with the as a complaint as diarrhea due to fecal incontinence. Okay. Okay, so do we have any further slides, Sajan? It's already 9:31. Okay, I think we will stop at this level, which is 9:30.
Dr. Ismail and Dr. Sethubabu, both of you are examiners, so give them some good messages.
Yes, yes.
And conclude. I'm usually an exam setter, so I set the OSCEs, but you're all examiners.
Deepak, you want to say something?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. Ismail?
No, you both seniors have told everything. What to do, what not to do.
No. Here it doesn't matter. You're all training everybody. There's nothing like senior or junior. We'll all share, because what I wanted the residents to understand is we are putting a lot of efforts to teach them. We are all preparing for them. They should reciprocate by doing very well. We want them to take care of the whole thing. So I want all of them who participated to be more active and do best. Thanks to Varghese, who did a wonderful initiation, and Madam Jayanti. It is not very easy to convince Madam Jayanti so easily. I mean, she's a very tough.
Dr. Sethubabu, at the end of it, they do very well. Only when
They
you're
do.
aggressive,
Yes.
they do very well in the exam. You always ask a question, no, whose student are you? They're all those aggressives. They're all those aggressors.
Yes.
So if you're mild, they will say, oh, this is the way the exam is conducted. It is not like that.
Yes.
It is not like that.
We actually made it a little aggressive so that
it has to be aggressive. It has to be aggressive.
They have to feel the aggression. People sprouted in fire will not wither in sun. That is the rule.
They will do well in the exam. In the exam, they do very well.
I think what I have to say is that whatever history is shown even in OSCE, they should have the basic thinking in the form of a syndromic diagnosis. Then syndromic diagnosis, which organ is affected, and then a list of differential diagnosis according to the importance, not a theoretical list. I think that should be the policy in long case, short case, in OSCE, whatever it is, and then they will not have any problems. That is what I think.
Sir, may make one question to my teachers. Sir, usually it is asked, how do you differentiate between intrahepatic and extrahepatic cholestasis? If there is cholangitis, yes. But based on the onset of pruritus versus jaundice, is there any other, can you differentiate? Is it medical cholestasis or obstruction?
So, Dr. A.S. Puri is one person who's one another aggressive examiner. So, he'll always say the patient has pain and fever. It indicates extrahepatic, but its absence does not rule out the possibility of extrahepatic. So then, in that stage, it becomes difficult. But if you have an insidious onset, you have prodromal symptoms, then we take all the other pictures together and then say, rather, in this patient, you have a drug-induced liver injury, you have some systemic symptoms, you have prodromal symptom. So you have to take the constellation of all the symptoms and then say, based on this, I'd like to consider intrahepatic in favor of rather than extrahepatic. That's all. That's the maximum that a clinician can think of. But if there is pain and abdominal pain and fever, you can almost vouch and say, yes, it is a case of extrahepatic. But its absence does not negate the presence of this.
Okay,
so
madam.
They have to balance. What we tell the patient, they will first say a syndromic diagnosis cholestatic jaundice, most likely intrahepatic cholestasis. The points for are dash, dash, dash. However, I would like to keep down on the list extrahepatic in the presence of this surgery, etc. My differentials would be these. That's how they have to speak. So that's a limitation of clinical examination, clinical history taking. That we accept.
I think the algorithm is, which is very simple, which has been there in the history, which has been there in the even books also. You have a cholestatic disease with normal enzymes, and then you do an ultrasound, you an IHBR. There is no IHBR, you go towards biopsy site. ANA positive, you go biopsy site. I think we channelize ourselves in the real-time practice. But I think, as Deepak has pointed out, the presence of Charcot stride is more extrahepatic, like what Madam said. But nobody would very strictly say. But when a discussion comes, we discuss all these points only as a learning exercise. But everything can be different when you term real time practice. But for learning sake, we need to know all these things. Then only it will help us. There are occasions when you thought suddenly IBS, there could be a malignancy. And this mistake I made, I was for the last 10 years, patient says I had an IBS. And I said, you are now also you have IBS, but colonoscopy shows a growth. I think somewhere you need to have a practice is different, preparing for the exam is different. And OSCE has a different third line, which probably people like me and Jayanti were never exposed to this kind of super shooting questions. You present a case, then 3 questions or 4 questions, answer in 8 minutes. I think this is again a learning. I think thanks to Varghese, who started, I mean, okay, again making this kind of training, which is the probably for the first time which I could see that I think we should learn more. And thanks to all those teachers who are actively teaching people, they're all very keen. This is a great opportunity for everybody to learn. I think people like Ismail and they are all seen participating so well. Thank you, Varghese.
We will not keep you long. It's already
Thank you,
9:30.
Thank
So
you.
thank you, ma'am. Next
Thank
week
you.
is Jayanti ma'am's class, and she's discussing 2 cases, and be ready at 8 o'clock next. That is 6th of April. Amish, is it okay, ma'am?
Bijosh and Subhash.
Bijosh and Subhash
Bijosh
will be
from
presenting
KIMS
it.
and Subhash from Nainital.
And the case will be brought by you.
Yeah.
Okay.
LBK and me. Yeah.
So I want to thank you, Professor Sethubabu, for joining us from Hyderabad and taking so much pains to provide the case as well as the OSCE. I have 4 more OSCEs provided by you, and we'll be showing it in the due course. And we look forward to further cooperation. Thanks, Jayanti ma'am. Thanks, Dr. Ismail. Thanks, Deepak, and all other faculty who have joined and listened. And to the residents, if you have any questions about today's discussion, please post it to your coordinator, Dr. Sujit, who will direct it to us, and we will give the answer. So thanking all of once again, I thank all of you, and have a nice sleep and good night to all of you.
Thank you, sir.
Good night. Good night.
Good night, sir.
Good night, sir.
Sojan.
Good night, sir.
Okay. I think we are.
I mean, it's late, sir. I think you did a well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for.